A mother is kneeling on the floor of a Tokyo subway station. Her 3-year-old is screaming. Full meltdown. People are watching. And she does something that stops me every time I think about it. She says nothing. No shh. No stop crying. No what's wrong with you. She just gets down to his level, stays close, and waits. Most of us would have already said it. The thing we say without thinking. Stop crying. You're fine. She didn't. And in less than 4 minutes, that little boy was calm. Not distracted. Not bribed. Calm. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what she was doing. Why it works, and why the thing most of us say instinctively is the one thing that makes it worse. There's a word in Japanese that doesn't translate cleanly into English. And I think that's exactly the problem. The word is amae. It comes from a verb amaeru, which means something like to lean on someone sweetly, to trust so completely that you don't have to hold yourself together, to know in your body that someone is there and you are safe. Japanese parents don't just know this word, they build their entire early childhood approach around it. And here's what that means in practice. When a child cries, the goal isn't to stop the crying. The goal is to become the safe place the crying can happen inside of. That's a completely different job. Western parenting tends to treat tears as a problem to solve. Amae treats them as a signal to answer. And here's where it gets interesting, because the science behind Amae wasn't discovered in Japan. It was discovered in a lab, and the researcher had no idea she was describing something Japanese mothers had been doing for centuries. For most of the 20th century, Western parenting advice pointed in one direction. Comfort your child too much and you'll raise someone who can't cope. Let them cry it out. Build resilience early. The faster they learn to self-soothe, the better. It felt logical. It felt tough but loving. The problem is the science doesn't support it. Researchers at Harvard's Center on the Developing Child found that when young children are left to cry alone for extended periods, their cortisol levels, the body's stress hormone, spike and stay elevated. The child may go quiet, but quiet isn't calm. The nervous system is still in distress. It just stopped signaling. And honestly, when I first read that, I felt something shift. Because how many of us were told or told ourselves that comforting a crying child was spoiling them, that we were making them weak? But here's what the research actually shows. Back in 1969, a psychologist named Mary Ainsworth at Johns Hopkins University ran what became one of the most replicated studies in child development. It's called the Strange Situation Experiment. She separated toddlers briefly from their caregivers and watched what happened when the caregiver returned. What she found changed everything. Children whose parents consistently responded to their distress, not perfectly, just consistently developed something she called secure attachment. And those children followed into adulthood, showed stronger emotional regulation or better relationships, and greater resilience under stress, not less. The children who learned to self-soothe early without co-regulation from a caregiver showed the opposite pattern. So the Japanese weren't being soft. They weren't raising clingy, dependent children. They were doing intuitively what it took Western science 50 years to prove. Amae isn't indulgence, it's the foundation. So how does it actually work? What are Japanese parents doing specifically that creates this outcome? There are 3 things, and they go in order. The first is something developmental neuroscientists call co-regulation. Here's the honest truth about a child under 5. Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for managing emotions, is not developed enough to do the job alone. It literally cannot. A toddler having a meltdown isn't choosing to be dramatic. They are neurologically overwhelmed. And the only way out is through an external regulator, someone whose nervous system is calm enough to borrow from. Japanese parents understand this not as a theory, but as a fact of life. You don't tell a drowning person to swim harder. You get in the water. The second thing is silence, and this one is counterintuitive. When a child is in the middle of a big emotion, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, is fully activated. In that state, language doesn't land. Words don't process. The brain is in survival mode, not learning mode. So when we say use your words, or calm down and tell me what's wrong, right in the middle of a meltdown, we're speaking to a part of the brain that has temporarily gone offline. Japanese parents, and particularly Japanese preschool teachers, tend to go quiet when a child goes loud. A hand on the back. A presence at close range. No talking, just waiting. That's not coldness. That's neuroscience. There's a second Japanese word I want to give you here. Mimamoru. It means to watch over and protect without interfering. To hold space without rushing in to fix. It's one of the core values taught in Japanese early childhood education, and it is genuinely one of the hardest things to practice as a parent. I've watched footage of Japanese preschool teachers sitting beside a crying child, not touching, not speaking, just present. 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And then the child lifts their own head, takes a breath, and goes back to playing. And honestly, this is the part I find most difficult. Because doing nothing feels like failing. Staying present without fixing, without explaining, without solving. That is the hardest skill in parenting. It goes against every instinct. But the third piece is what makes it complete. After the storm passes, not during after Japanese parents name what happened. Simply, you were really upset. Not a lecture, not a lesson, just a reflection. Because labeling and emotion research from UCLA confirms, activates the prefrontal cortex and helps the brain begin to build its own regulatory pathways. You feel it. It gets named. It becomes something you can recognize next time. What Japanese parents figured out is that a child who is allowed to feel everything fully safely becomes an adult who isn't controlled by their feelings. And that changes everything. So here's your practical takeaway. 3 things you can try tonight. No prep required. The first is what I call the kneeling rule. When your child starts crying before you say anything, before you react at all, get down to their level. Kneel, sit, crouch. Just get your face to their face. That's it. Research on threat response in children shows that seeing a familiar face at eye level rather than towering above them begins to reduce cortisol almost immediately. You haven't said a word yet. You've already started helping. The second is the 30-second silence rule. Once you're down there, don't speak for 30 seconds. I know that feels like a long time. It's not. Just be close. Let your calm nervous system do the work. You are the co-regulator. Your presence is the message. The third is name, don't fix. After 30 seconds, say one sentence. Just one. Something like, you're really upset right now. Not, why are you crying? Not, stop crying. Not, it's okay. Just a simple, honest label for what you're seeing. That single sentence activates the part of their brain that can start to calm itself. You're not fixing the feeling. You're giving it a shape they can hold. That's the whole practice. Kneel. Wait. Name. It sounds almost too simple. But simple is what works at 2 a.m. when you're exhausted and your child is on the floor of the kitchen. Give it 2 weeks. Not every time you're human, but most times. And watch what happens to the length of the meltdowns. Amae. Mimamoru. 2 words. 1 philosophy. These aren't Japanese secrets. They're what every child's nervous system has always needed. We just forgot to listen. If you want more on how the world's wisest cultures raise emotionally intelligent kids, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. See you in the next one.